Hi guys, today we're going to do the poem Eating Poetry by Mark Strand. Let's take a look at the context of the poem. This poem is best described as surreal, which means it has bizarre, strange qualities similar to what you would experience in a dream. This poem is also a metaphor for someone who experiences great joy and is transformed by their passion. In this case, their passion is reading poetry. It just so happens that this poem takes place in a library. Let's take a look at the structure. This poem has 18 lines. There are 6 stanzas, each with 3 lines known as tercets, as you can see over here. There is no rhyme scheme, so the poem is written as free verse. There is one example of internal rhyme in line 12. And finally, the tone of the poem is joyful and happy. Let's start analyzing the poem. Ink runs from the corners of my mouth. There is no happiness like mine. I have been eating poetry. In line 1, the word ink comes from the pages of poetry that the speaker has eaten. The poet continues to say that the ink runs from his mouth. He has eaten or consumed a lot of poetry, which is why there is just so much ink. It literally runs out of his mouth. There is no happiness like mine. Here the poet makes it clear that poetry is his passion and it makes him extremely happy. In line 3, we see a metaphor. This line here is a metaphor for the poet reading and taking in large amounts of poetry. He reads and absorbs it so intensely that it is as if he is consuming or eating it. He really enjoys reading poetry. The librarian does not believe what she sees. Her eyes are sad, and she walks with her hands in her dress. Here in line 4, we see a new character pop up, the librarian. And this hints at the poem taking place in a library. Poetry and literature can be found here, so we know that the poet is exactly where he belongs. The librarian also represents people who witness someone else being passionate, fulfilled, and experiencing enjoyment, but can't understand it or experience it themselves. She does not believe what she sees. The librarian sees the speaker eating the poetry and is shocked. In line 5, the speaker describes her as having sad eyes. Eyes reveal true feelings. The librarian appears jealous of the speaker's experience with reading poetry. She can't hide her disappointment or feelings of being unfulfilled. She does not know what it's like to experience the joy he is expressing. Line 6 says that she walks with her hands in her dress. This makes her appear withdrawn, powerless, and insecure. In lines 5 and 6, we see an example of enjambment. This means that line 5 continues into line 6 without any punctuation marks. And finally, in line 6, we also see an example of alliteration. And this is when we repeat the w sound, walks with. Let's move on to the next part of the poem. The poems are gone, the light is dim. The dogs are on the basement stairs and coming up. In line 7, the speaker says that the poems are gone. This means that the speaker has eaten all the poems and there's nothing left. In line 8, the speaker mentions the word dim. Dim is another way of saying not shining brightly or clearly. So here we see that something changes now that the poetry is gone. We will start to see the effects that the poetry has had on the speaker. In line 9, the speaker says, "The dogs are on the basement stairs and coming up." This could be introducing the dark or chaotic shift in the mood. It could imply a twist that is about to take place in the poem as a result of the lack of light. This line is also an example of surreal imagery. The speaker begins to see or hear strange things, and this may be his imagination. It could also be symbolic for what happens after reading large amounts of poetry. Their eyeballs roll, their blonde legs burn like brush. The poor librarian begins to stamp her feet and weep. In line 10, the descriptions of the dogs are quite scary. This changes the happy mood to a more chaotic mood. It could also be hinting at the speaker's dark imagination, thoughts and feelings coming to life. In line 11, the poet mentions the word brush, and this is actually referring to weeds and small sticks used to make a fire. In this line we see, the dogs seem to be on fire. This adds to their scary, ominous, dark appearance. But fire can also symbolize passion, which links back to the poet's intense love for poetry. Fire consumes or burns the brush quickly. Then in line 12 we see the word weep. This means to shed tears or cry. The poet uses the word poor to describe the librarian, and this shows us that the speaker sympathizes with the librarian while all this is happening. The speaker describes her as stamping her feet and weeping. This emphasizes the shift or change in mood. The librarian feels worse than before, now that the speaker is experiencing something surreal. We see another example of alliteration when the poet repeats the b sound. Blonde legs burn like brush. We then see an example of assonance in line 12, and this is the repetition of the e sound. Feet and weep. She does not understand. When I get on my knees and lick her hand, she screams. Here the librarian does not understand the poet's love and obsession with consuming large amounts of poetry. She also does not understand the speaker's surreal experiences. In line 14, the speaker reveals that he now has transformed into an animal, maybe into one of the dogs he mentioned earlier. When the speaker says that he gets on his knees and licks her hand, the speaker tries to engage and interact with the librarian by licking her hand like a dog would. In line 15, we see that the librarian is frightened by the effects the poetry has had on the speaker. For example, his strange actions, behavior, and transformation. I am a new man. I snarl at her and bark. I romp with joy in the bookish dark. Here in line 16, the speaker describes himself as a new man. He has been changed or transformed by the poetry because he is a new man. The speaker still describes himself as a man, even though he is barking, licking, and snarling at the librarian. In line 17, the word snarl means an aggressive growl showing teeth. He behaves like a dog by snarling and barking at the librarian. The poetry has changed him as a person and has made him feel comfortable with behaving like an animal. In line 18, the word romp means play roughly and energetically. So here we see that the speaker now romps around like a puppy. The word bookish hints at the setting, which is the library. And finally, we need to take note that lines 17 and 18 rhyme. The rhyme emphasizes the joy the speaker is feeling. There is a mixture of joy and happiness with the dark. This suggests that the two belong together. Now let's take a look at the internal analysis of the poem. The transitions between joy and darkness suggest that it is all part of what happens when someone is eating poetry. The poet suggests that poetry has the ability to transform you. It changes who you are and how you behave. It also suggests that people who are unable to experience something in the same way a passionate person does often feel disappointed and sad. They are frightened and unable to understand the effects of passion on someone. Let's take a look at the librarian's perspective. In lines 4 to 6, she sees the speaker eating poetry and is shocked. After seeing how happy the speaker is, she feels sad because she does not experience it in the same way he does. In lines 12 to 13, she stamps her feet and weeps because she does not understand. She is very upset while the speaker feels comfortable with the strange occurrences because he is the one experiencing it. In lines 14 to 15, the speaker licks her hand. She is frightened and screams because she doesn't understand. She feels afraid. Her perspective is that of an outsider, someone who does not experience a passion in the same way. Now we're going to take a look at some themes. The first theme is happiness and transformation. The poet shows the happiness someone experiences when they are completely invested in their passion. He is transformed into a new man. He has a new nature and perspective. How he experiences the world is completely different from how the librarian experiences it. The contrast between the speaker and the librarian is shown by depicting them physically as two different species. She is human and he is like a dog. The transformation could symbolize how personal enjoyment influences someone's behavior and outlook on life. Let's take a look at the last theme, perceptions of reality. Eating or consuming poetry is an amazing experience for the speaker, but the librarian sees the speaker's experience as terrifying and strange. This poem shows two views of reality. One person's happy transformation is another person's nightmare. Conveying personal experiences to other people can be problematic as they do not always fully understand and cannot experience it for themselves. And that's it for Eating Poetry. If this has helped you, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to drop me a comment down below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.